Jeff York, I've got my roller skates on. You can't tell, but you're just going to have to trust me on this one. I am ready to sing our way through a 45th anniversary review of Xanadu. Yes, we are talking about Xanadu, a movie that I don't even know if it's on anyone's radar anymore, except for the fine folks at Kino Lorber who just put a 4K of this movie. But you've got, I think, more experience with this film than I have. You've only seen it twice, from what I understand.
That's correct.
And the second time was in preparation for this
Yes.
podcast, which means you saw it in the theater when you were a youngin'. I want to get that perspective because I've got my own storied history with this movie. But take me back to 1980 and going to see Xanadu. Was there any hype for this movie, or were you just at the multiplex like, I don't know, is this like a Krull ripoff or something? Is this space fantasy? Or, oh my God, roller skates, Olivia Newton-John.
I know. How could it miss? It did a little bit, but it didn't really the opening weekend, as I recall, because I went and saw it opening weekend, and it was kind of a big deal because we were coming off of sort of a little bit of a sort of a musical renaissance, at least as far as contemporary musicals go in the sort of country and maybe the world. I mean, certainly Saturday Night Fever really kickstarted with, turning disco into something when disco was dying. It kind of brought it back, and that's considered a classic movie and a classic score today. And I was in high school then, and everybody was eating it up with a spoon and seeing that movie 5, 6, 7 times, that kind of stuff. I was also seeing Brian De Palma movies 3 or 4 times then too. So I was kind of both sort of the happy-go-lucky, earnest child, and yet I was also, I like the dark stuff too. But then Xanadu came out with Olivia Newton-John, who was probably the biggest sort of pop star then, with so many best-selling albums. She came off of Grease, which was, I think, the number 2 situation in sort of this musical renaissance, and that was even in some respects bigger hit, I think, than Saturday Night Fever. That could was rated PG, I think, so kiddies could go and see it, and families were going to it, and it really had an all-family appeal to it. In fact, I remember that movie being very much derided by critics at the time, but I thought it was then, and I think it still holds up now, as a pretty fun film. I mean, the musical numbers are pretty well staged, and there's a spirit to it, and there's a pluck to it. There's also a lot of energy and the humor and the wit of not only the lyrics, but the screenplay that went along with that. And, the one thing I loved about John Travolta, whatever he's done, at least in those days, is, man, did he commit to the material. He was clearly too old for Danny Zuko by at least a decade, but man, did he play the hell out of that part. They were, and he played it so well, and he was really committed, and he was, doing the full dancing, everything. And so Olivia Newton-John is this big thing, and then she becomes a big movie star, and she's starring in this. And I think the problem with it was, despite the disco songs and ELO and roller skating, which was popular, and all the colors, and sort of we were understanding these sort of visual effects now, whether it was Wonder Woman or Xanadu, that they could do around people and sort of swirling lights and all these kind of things. It probably was too young of a story. I think there's a guilelessness and an earnestness to it. I think it was maybe done that way to appeal to all families and stuff, but there's so much innocence to it that I think people were laughing at it more than with it. And I remember thinking, this is fun, but it seemed sort of just here, as opposed to this, or maybe getting a little more smart alecky. I'll just share this as a quick wrap up of this sort of first volley on it. When they brought Xanadu to Broadway and did a musical version of it, they kept basically the story intact as well as all the songs, but they had fun almost a little bit satirically with that sense of innocence. Like it was a little bit more winking at the audience about it, or, kind of putting it in the context of the time, like, really, that's what you think? Well, yes. Wow. That's, that kind of stuff where they're kind of mocking the innocence of it. And it played probably for our more cynical modern times. And this was a number of years back, but it was a big hit, and it went out on tour. That's how big of a hit it was. And yet they kept basically everything intact. The tone was just a little less sweet and earnest. It was just a little more knowing, like they're having fun with this. Wink, wink at the audience. They sort of did the same thing with Death Becomes Her. Now, that was a big, very cynical, maybe too cynical ahead of its time, black comedy back in the early 90s. Done by Robert Zemeckis, with the 2 women, trying to stay young forever, and then ended up destroying each other's bodies so they can never die. When they did that on Broadway, and I saw it when it showed here in previews, it was the same exact kind of idea. It was a lot of comedy, a lot of physical shtick. They added music to it, obviously, but there was a knowingness about it. Like, we know they were having fun with this. Like, this is the Broadway version of it. And that's kind of what they did with Xanadu too, where obviously Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, when they played the original material in Death Becomes Her, were going at each other full throttle, like, this is life and death gladiator stuff, with, even though it's done with, shovels and kitchen knives.
Did you see I saw Xanadu on stage when it came to Chicago.
I did not. I missed it, but I did. I did know of that was the general feeling of it, and that's helped make it, I think, a little bit more palatable for today's cynics out there.
As I mentioned, I've had a storied history with this movie, and it took me probably 5 or 6 times to even like it, and now I love it. It's one of my wife's favorite movies.
Oh, that's funny.
And so, of course, over the course of 20 plus years, we're going to watch each other's favorite movies.
Sure.
Although somehow she doesn't end up watching mine on repeat, but that's because they tend to involve like eviscerations and gratuitous nudity.
Xanadu. Which way are we going tonight, honey? I think
would love a crossover, by the way. No, so I can't remember in the chronology of my appreciation of this film. I think I went to see this with her. I believe it was her birthday present for turning 25 or something. We went to Chicago, one of the theaters downtown, and watched it, and we both hated it. I can't remember why. She might have not liked it because it was so different, or it was different enough in places from the show. And I think it was much longer than the movie, as those kinds of shows tend to be. I think I might have hated it just because it was Xanadu and I hadn't quite come to appreciate the story or the characters at all. But no, watching it, I think it was the last time I watched it before the show a couple of years back. There was something that clicked, and it might have been a function of age, because I kind of crowded out a lot of the music and focused on what this story is about. And yeah, it is kind of an earnest story, but I think particularly today, for right now, it's something that it probably would need to be remade, because it's asking a lot to say, put this back in theaters and see if audiences respond, because it's so earnest and quote unquote cheesy. But the whole idea of Sonny Malone, played by Michael Beck, he's a young artist living in California, and his job is recreating album covers at large sizes to put almost like mural size to be hung in record stores. And it sounds like a really kick-ass job.
I tell you, back then it probably was, because the Tower Records and all those big music shops were a big deal, and getting that new LP was the biggest thing,
Right. But throughout the film, we see him talking about making art, or talking with his boss about wanting to do something more than just this corporate slop, because he doesn't like the gig, because it's literally someone saying, hey, make this bigger. And even though he gets to paint and use his skills, he's kind of fallen out of love with even the act of making that art. And in today's world of artificial intelligence, AI art, and kind of getting further and further away from the creative process, I feel like this is sort of a reminder of what it means to be a creative person, to do stuff not only with your mind, but with your hands. I mean, I don't want to, again, denigrate people who work on the computer to make art. I mean, hell, I do it. But there is something different about taking a paintbrush and mixing colors and finding the exact right thing on your palette and experimenting and coming away from 16 hours of just being tired and frankly filthy and just wanting to get up a couple hours later and do it all again.
Right.
The disco and stuff is great, and so is the roller skating, but this was that's what I really responded to in this movie.
Well, it's funny. I was not a film critic yet at that time, though I'd seen plenty of movies, and I think my critical palette was broadening. I mean, it was coming off of the 70s, which I think was still the best decade for films, and I was very fortunate to sort of come of age during that time. And maybe I'm slightly prejudiced, but you think about from 67 or 68 until really probably Star Wars, and then suddenly blockbusters became a much more feasible or desirable thing for studios to do. There were so many great films, and this one was very commercial, sort of not too pretentious. It was kind of a straight down the middle kind of musical. It didn't have the ambition of Cabaret or the edge that Saturday Night Fever did, or another movie that opened that same year, or maybe just right before it, I think, was All That Jazz, which took the musical into this place where, you know, it had the depth and the edge of something like, Saturday Night Fever and the kind of angst of New York and everything. And yet, my God, it was edited with and shot with this precision and this beauty of a Fellini film and all that stuff. And this one was, I mean, the one thing I will just say watching this, and this is like, oh, that was what triggered me, is like, I remember the scene sort of early on where she sings Magic, you know, which became the big breakout top 10 hit from this song. And it's shot almost in complete darkness with very little real thought put into how are we filming this? And, she's trying to sort of seduce Sonny into thinking that he can do whatever he dreams of and make, art into reality, whether it's a disco or what he wants to do with his painting. And she's clearly a stunt double through half of it. And, it's like, where is she? And why aren't they interacting? And there's no close-ups. And yet this music is this big hit song. And it's a really ethereal, kind of mysterious, romantic song. And that's the best they did for that number. And now there were others that came across better. But then you think about 2 years earlier in Greece and how well they shot Beauty School Dropout. This kind of throwaway number in the third act just to give, the one character something that gives her sort of that time in the sun. And, I guess she's sort of the sea story, if you will. But that plays like gangbusters. And they've got Stockard Channing and Dinah Manoff sitting there in the background, doing all this kind of mugging stuff. And they're doing a real performance back there. There's none of that in this. It's like there's times where, well, we don't care about who's in the background because we're shooting the skaters coming towards us. No, you have to choreograph the people in the background. And the director, Robert Greenwald, who came from the world of really more dramas or documentarians, was in over his head, I think, as far as trying to do something like this. Though, there's a certain amount of stylization in the animation and some of those things, very well done. But a lot of it is below the sort of even norm, if you will, for a good musical, let alone one that really transcends the genre and becomes sort of just a great film.
I can see where you're coming
from.
And
I recognize that even in high school. Like, this isn't Grease. This isn't as cleverly edited as Saturday Night Fever, and it sure ain't All That Jazz. Come on, folks. What's going on here?
Well, I mean, I understand the criticism.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use the term, I don't think it's fair, but I don't want that to sound as harsh as it is. Because
I think you're probably right.
Well, because every film is different, and you can't expect every filmmaker to know or be able to pull off something that someone else did that's monumental. Otherwise, everything would be, Star Wars or Citizen Kane.
Right.
The fact that you're saying that Greenwald came from the world of documentary is kind of interesting, because I wonder if some of that lack of animation and depth to the performances of the background players might be because I assume you're thinking specifically of perhaps the opening night number, one of the three that they have at the end where they open the Xanadu Club.
Yes.
He might be thinking, well, these are supposed to be, regular people coming in from LA to this opening this club. You're going to have the conga line on skates, but it's not going to be fully choreographed, bringing that realism to it, but it also doesn't play as cinematically as, say, something.
Right.
Because
that's fair.
I think you bring up an excellent
assessment.
Well, I think you bring up an excellent point, though, about that lack of depth and richness, which is another reason I think, dare I say, I would like to see a remake of this movie, even adding some of that millennium cynicism to it. But I feel like you could have a real struggle of this guy, perhaps not just that his corporate boss at this, company that outsources these record paintings. Maybe it could be the struggle of him trying to maintain a real level of artistry, but coming up against the new era of like, well, I can chat GPT this and laser print it out in 30 seconds. You need a week to do what?
and it wouldn't have that human touch to it. And maybe there'd be the, ramifications of why that isn't as good, or what would he bring to it. I mean, they get a little bit of that going here where he's painting, Kira onto the album cover, and he's giving her a much more realistic, specific look than the woman who appears on the album cover, which was taken off of this photograph that was done sort of, she just happened to walk in there and the photographer liked that picture. And so he used it. So yeah, you're right. There's little indications that I think would work here. I also think there's opportunities in almost every scene where you can say, how could I make this better? And I'll give you one other one that just sort of slayed me as I forgot about this watching it so many years later. There's a great scene where, I think it's Sonny, played by Michael Beck, which I think was 2 years, maybe 3 years after he did Warriors. So it was like, we'll show you a range here. Not only am I going to sing, but I'm going to play the most kind, easygoing guy ever. There's no, vest over my rock hard abs fighting warriors in the subway, gangs in the subway. But anyway, he's kind of pleading for an opportunity to take Kira out of her situation where she's Zeus's daughter and she's only supposed to be a muse, and she's gotten him to build the thing, which was his dream, and as well as the dream of Danny McGuire, played by never smiling Gene Kelly. And he's making the argument that she should be able to stay with him. And we get the voice of Zeus and his wife, Mnemosyne, I think it's pronounced. And I could tell from the voices, because I'm a fairly well-read or well-seasoned old fart in this game, that it's Wilfred Hyde-White and Coral Brown, two of the great character actors of British cinema, and we never see them. And we just literally have, Michael Beck and Olivia Newton-John kind of staring at the darkness with their mouths agape, like, and there's some timing that's kind of funny about it. Like, well, maybe we could do this. It might be possible. Oh, that's good of you, Zeus. That's the way you should be thinking. Some of that's well timed. But imagine if they came to life and you gave, an actor of stature, whether it's Helen Mirren and Liam Neeson or something like that, playing these today, which I know they've already played these roles before in some kind of, I think it was Clash of the Titans, but they're just this sort of lack of humanity and sort of understanding of what's kind of cinematic, and voiceover is not cinematic. Even with Hal in 2001, you get the two astronauts reacting to it, and Stanley Kubrick's cutting closer and closer and closer. So we understand that Hal is listening, even though he's through glass and stuff. There's none of that kind of sensibility here that I think a natural storyteller would, except for a documentarian who just kind of lets it unspool as is. And it's not enough here. Even if we hear their voices and that's the way the script is, show me the actors. Show them interacting with it. Gives it a little more oomph.
See, I'm going to respectfully disagree on this point.
You liked watching them just go.
Well, I did, because I was in, the thing is, it was that theater of the mind.
Oh, okay.
Because maybe we should rewind the tape for anyone who hasn't seen Xanadu and for some reason is watching this thing so far. Right. And we'll get back to the Zeus thing in a second. But Sonny is this frustrated artist. He meets Kira, who is played by Olivia Newton-John, who's one of 8 muses, the daughters of Zeus, who come down and they inspire the people of Earth to do great creative things. She and Sonny end up falling in love, which creates all sorts of complications. In the midst of this, Sonny meets Danny McGuire, played by Gene Kelly, who was a former big band guy back in World War II, who actually knew a previous incarnation of Kira, who was his muse, but she left and he kind of lost all of his creative drive, ended up going into the family construction business and has sort of regretted it for 40 years. He and Sonny get together, decide to open up a club called Xanadu. And that's pretty much the movie. There aren't any real twists and turns or anything like that. There's that customary third act thing where Kira has to leave because they can't be together because there's a man and a goddess and all this stuff, but that's resolved in a way that's kind of cute at the end of the movie. But I will say there's one scene, and it is right before the big climactic Xanadu club opening night number, where Sonny is roller skating around Santa Monica or wherever he is, and he comes across the giant mural, which at the beginning of the movie has all of the goddesses, the muses, right, painted on it, and he decides to charge headfirst into this thing, and it's an act of faith, and he's very lucky that it works because he flies into the wall and into this dark kind of cavernous room. These like light halogen bulbs or whatever light up the floor, and Kira is there in the darkness, and all of a sudden Zeus is talking to them, and he's like, she's like, you can't stay here, you go away, my dad's gonna be really mad. And then dad shows up, or his voice does, and he's like, this is forbidden, Kira must stay here and you've got to leave. And so he's like, but we love each other, love is forbidden. And then Nemesis, Mrs. Zeus shows up, or a disembodied voice, and starts basically being the voice of sort of reason, like, oh, it's it's love, and maybe she can just go back for a day or this opening night, and then she, then they cannot be together. It's just put her on parole. What I liked about the way the scene was executed is it did feel very much like a scene where you're talking to your grandparents on the phone, and all of a sudden, like, you're talking to your grandpa, and then you can hear grandma in the background, like, bickering or trying to say something or being the voice of reason. You can't see it, but you kind of imagine how it's playing out.
Sure.
I loved that, she was like, didn't we go through this last week? It was like, that was centuries ago. She's like, oh, I can't figure out this whole time thing.
Right.
And then they're talking about human emotions. She's like, oh yeah, we learned about that in our human characteristics class or something. It's like this idea that there's something else going on in this otherworldly realm that we're not privy to, and we only get a glimpse of it for a couple of minutes. I feel like if we'd seen them on screen, that would have probably dragged the scene out more.
Yeah.
Which, getting towards the end of the movie, even though I like this movie, I'm still kind of looking at my watch. And also, I think you just might have lost something by literally seeing them. If for another reason, they probably would have been like cheesy togas with glowing lights around them and stuff. Like, no, we don't need any more of that either.
Clash of the Titans, which still looks cheesy even with the remake. No, I grant you, I can see that take on it. I just think that, unfortunately, the way it's shot and the way they're sort of photographed looking at it, they're playing it sort of one emotion, and there's not much nuance to their performances throughout, let alone in that scene. It's just one of those things where I think if you were a filmmaker trying to remake something like this, you might look at that and go, as you look at every scene, and wonder, how can I make this a little bit better? What can I do that brings more room to it? Certainly maybe plays off of whatever star power you might have. Not saying that Hyde White and Brown were exactly box office, though Coral Brown was Mrs. Vincent Price at the time.
Oh, yes. Well, to your point, Jeff, I mean, I think, and I'd probably have to listen to one of the 4 audio commentary, or 3 or 4 commentary or whatever on this disc. I don't know if that's how many, but it looks like a lot, to see if they actually answer this question. But my suspicion, again, listening to you talk about it is really helping me reframe, like, why didn't I have my full critic hat on while I was watching this? Possibly because I've seen it so many times, I don't really see it anymore necessarily, or at least I'm picking up different things. But throughout this whole sequence, Kira has that otherworldly kind of glow about her. And I'm wondering if they wanted to maintain that look because they're in the spirit realm, if it would have been more of a hassle to like film it in a more dynamic fashion where you have different angles and all this, whereas you've got Olivia Newton-John just pretty much like standing still and talking, and she's emoting mostly with her face, if that's easier to rotoscope or whatever they're doing there.
No, I think that's very true. I also think in these days, there wasn't a lot of money spent on most movies. I mean, it was very rare that most films got a ton of money spent on them, and if they did, they went into overtime and they lucked out by being well received and made the money back. But in those days budgets were much more modest. I also think they figured, hey, we've got Olivia Newton-John, she's probably the hottest pop star in the planet, and she's coming off of Grease. We just have to film her and people will love her, and that's kind of what they did on variety specials she was on and different things like that. So, if you look at the Grammys that are on YouTube from that era, they're pretty straightforward. I mean, they almost look like you and I could have shot them on our cell phones. There's not too much imagination necessarily to a lot of the camera movement, and they didn't need it, nor did they want it or have the time for it. So, a lot of times the get was just enough. And I think Newton-John for this was a pretty big get. I just think if you were looking at today, though, as a modern filmmaker, you'd have to realize, too, that what passed for oohs and ahs back in 1980 with all of the sort of swirling and animation on top of things around them and some of the magical kind of stars that, dissolves and stuff like that would have to be bettered today, just because that wouldn't be very impressive, because we've seen that in, so many other things since then. And I think you'd have to be probably a little bit cognizant of not wanting to look dated too much, because that's the other thing that I noticed when I watch is, wow, this is almost as dated as an episode of Saved by the Bell, which would seem dated before the show even ran, let alone the fact that, wait a minute, where are these shoulder pads coming from? There must have been a big shoulder pad market in those days.
Oh, there was.
And the teased hair. Everybody, they all had that teased hair in the front that was kind of, like this on the sides. But what I did like about...
real quick, please. This reminds me of something that you said. I saw, I think, a meme on Facebook, and this made me feel incredibly old. Okay. And I'm, in my late 40s, but someone posted a picture that looked like it could have been out of the high school, like the upperclassman yearbook of when I was in school. The girls with the teased hair, and they're all hanging out and like looking fun, look like they're about to go get pizza. And the caption was, this is what your grandparents looked like in 1984 or whatever. I'm like,
I know, isn't that funny? I know we almost look as tragically unhip as, but then again, like they brought back the duck's ass because of Happy Days and some of those kind of things. So who knows? But some of this stuff does come back. I don't think the shoulders and the teased hairs come back, but some of the jeans, some of the boots, some of those kind of things are coming back, but not quite as much as like the 80s. I think 70s is more chic now than the 80s was. And this was sort of leading the look of what I think the 80s was going to be. The other thing that I think is interesting about this movie is it gets by on a lot of charm and a lot of the music, because I think the music soundtrack is pretty good. I mean, it's ELO and it's Olivia Newton-John. A number of these songs made it into the top 40, even the top 10 of the top 40. I remember it was dominating the soundtrack. I'll tell you what I think is a key that people forget sometimes when you look at box office, and it's true back then, and it's all the more true today. But that is, generally films make a ton of money based on two factors. And one is the one that every studio wants today, and that is 4 quadrants. If we can get everybody to come and see it, that would be better than just saying, well, we're making an adult R-rated, romantic comedy, which kids aren't going to want to necessarily see. So the more people you can get in that sort of cross the spectrum of potential audience, the better. And this is the other thing that's main, and I think one of the reasons this film failed is repeat audiences. I don't know a lot of people who want to go back and see this one, at least not right away. I think maybe once it showed up on cable, and there have been retrospectives about Olivia Newton-John and things like that over the years. People have found this and discovered, it was cheesy in many ways, but it was knowingly cheesy in a lot of ways too, and it had its charm. I mean, certainly they're bringing this one back. They didn't bring back You Can't Stop the Music, which is also around the same time, and it was dreadful. I mean, there's almost nothing watchable in that. That
was Steve Guttenberg was in that, right before Police Academy, I think.
Yeah, and Bruce Jenner too. I mean, it was and the Village People, of course. And I mean, the other one that people completely forget about is they did Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club with the Bee Gees, and that kind of sank them like a stone afterwards too. And Peter Frampton filling out the Beatles, and there was a big George Burns cameo after one of his Oscars for the Sunshine Boys. It was like, oh yeah. But this one
I have no idea about this. I have to see this movie. I had no idea it existed.
I know, it's like, and those were the hottest musical acts, but they just weren't quite right for the material. But this one isn't nearly as bad as those. It's not good, but it's not as bad as those. And I think once you look at it now in retrospect, it has a certain amount of charm. But people didn't talk about going to see this one or wanting to go see it right away. I remember Grease. I had talked to people by the second weekend, and they'd already seen it twice during the week. It's like, you went on a school night? Yes, people were going on a school night to see Grease. And, that's the thing with superhero movies and Jaws. I mean, I saw Jaws in the theater probably 3 or 4 times, and I was, I think, 11 or 12 or something. It was just, that's the key to kind of keeping that box office going and going, is more and more people want to see it, and they keep going back to see it again and again.
Well, there's something, a lot of what you're saying, I think, makes sense. And I'm thinking about this now. Something like Grease has sort of a universal appeal, because 99% of the people who have watched that movie, at least in America, have been to high school.
Yes.
So, they weren't necessarily alive in the 50s, but they can relate to those archetypes, which carried over through the generations. Like Saved by the Bell has the same kind of archetypes with the jocks and the kids in the leathers and stuff. But also, you've got all these color, like a plethora of colorful characters and different things going on, like A and B and C plots. With this, it's about a struggling artist, and you've got a guy from the big band era and a muse, and they're trying to open a nightclub. That is niche upon niche upon niche. So I could see people going to see it once, maybe, but it's not. I could see going to see Grease multiple times in the cinema when it came out. This really does feel like a one and done, even if it has a bunch of songs on it that you could hear on the radio or buy the tapes of the records. You could still do that, but you listen to a song for 3.5 minutes. You have to sit through an hour and 40 minutes of it to get to the song that you like.
Right, right. That's so true. And I think also, let's not sell musicals short. I think a lot of times what makes them hits are when they have songs that are hits. And now this one was not necessarily, the songs were leading to the film being seen again and again, but it kept, I think, the memory of it and maybe the energy of it going well beyond past its time in the theaters when it was showing up on cable. I mean, certainly those songs are remembered today. They're part of a lot of people's great hits of the 80s kind of thing. I mean, Olivia Newton-John has really not gone too out of vogue in her popularity and everything up all the way through the last few years of her life and different things. So, it had a good score. I mean, that was the thing when I was watching, it's like, oh, I remember that's right. Michael, there's the duets and, some of the, I think Michael Beck did not do the duet though with her. I think
for Suddenly, that was someone else.
That was right. Yeah, they brought in somebody else to sing that, but nonetheless, I mean, Magic is a great song. I forgot that it was not all that specially done in the movie, but that's a great song, and there's some other good ones. The one thing I'll say too that I have to say, coming from an old movie sort of ethos and old movie musicals, it was a pretty nice little coup that I don't think got enough credit at the time for getting Gene Kelly in there. He was very good in this. He gave it a lot of energy. He's on roller skates. He did not condescend to the performance. In fact, if anything, he sold a cheesy line with a great wink and a smile. Well, just a touch, knowing that it's kind of silly, but he was having fun with this, and I think he was contagious in this. And maybe he's kind of the standout of the acting in it. But there's certain charms in this movie that I had forgotten, and I probably appreciated them when I was in high school. But I think just over the years, it doesn't come up as like one of the great movie musicals. And I mean, it's interesting. Robert Greenwald went on to direct The Burning Bed, which was one of these great TV movies from that decade with Farrah Fawcett. Really kind of changed her career. And, it was one of those very hard, tough sort of, the issues of spousal abuse. And there's something about Amelia, which was about incest in a similar era that, these films really stood out and were sort of groundbreaking. So, Greenwald may have gotten the Razzie for Worst Director. It was the first Razzies that they created for these musicals, apparently.
Did he get, for this movie, he got a Razzie?
He got Worst Director. It was the only one that had won. It was nominated for some others, but this was, I think it was created because there were some of these musicals that were coming out that just weren't particularly good, like Can't Stop the Music and a few others. But it's not as bad as that. I don't think it's inspired, but a lot of it, you can feel the energy, what they were going for. I can tell you at the time that some of those special effects and the lights and music sort of together and sync went very well with that. And the ELO kind of sound synced very well with this. It had a futuristic sort of yet, romantic sweep to it. Olivia Newton-John needs a director who's a little more making her come across, but I think at the same time, if you're playing a muse, you're a little bit two-dimensional already because you're only there to sort of inspire. It's not like Sandy was like, am I being a slut enough for this? No, let me show you how it's done. Let me wrap that hair up and get you some pants that they wouldn't wear for another 40 years, but we're going to put you in them today.
Well, on that
look.
Well, on that muse thing, this reminded me of another film that I love and I've seen dozens of times from my youth, Mannequin, which came out in 1986,
yes.
Which is essentially this movie without as much music and roller skates.
Kim Cattrall, one of her first big hits.
Right, but you're talking about like and she was like an Egyptian princess who
that's right.
prayed to the gods and sort of became a muse.
Yes.
Like she inspired Michelangelo. that was one of my favorite lines to that movie. She was talking about Michelangelo and talking to Andrew McCarthy, and she's like, yeah, he wasn't very interested in me. He was involved with a guy named David. And it's like, that was one of those things I did not get when I was 8, but when I was 16, I was like, oh shit. But she, probably because she was a human being who became a goddess or a muse or whatever, she did have that personality and that kind of sex appeal that, again, if you were to recreate this movie Xanadu today, I think you could inject some of that personality into the Kira character. As far as the special effects go, it's weird because looking at this, yeah, it does look kind of dated. It looks really great in 4K. I mean, the effects are still like, oh, this is early days. It looks kind of cheesy, but it's really well done.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd come to see this in a film that came out 2 years after this, that has not only woke up like generations of fans of, kind of big screen sci-fi, but is this year being honored in a legacy sequel, Tron.
Yeah,
This is the light cycles. This is the people with the kind of the glowing outlines and stuff, all over their bodies. I think this movie, and this was not the vessel to do it. This kind of earnest. I keep trying to avoid saying the word cheesy, because I don't think it's cheesy.
There's an innocence and an earnestness to it that make it seem, almost naive. But I think the naivete is part of its charm here. That they aren't, that Sonny really maintains a certain amount of awe and sweetness to him. He doesn't get bitchy and snarky and, grumpy man or nasty man. He's, like, for example, say what you will. I mean, I love the movie Splash, but again, something similar where you've got Madison, the Daryl Hannah mermaid, who's kind of naive and kind of, I don't want to say two-dimensional, but, she's a little bit obvious and there's not a much of depth to her because she's just this sweet, innocent mermaid. But the Tom Hanks character around her, while being a very funny guy in the movie and all that, is also a little bit of a jerk. He's not necessarily always nice to everybody. And he's, the typical cynical guy that became very much the prototype of men in sitcoms and all kinds of shows and movies since then. But Michael Beck doesn't play that here. He plays a really sweet guy, kind of worthy of Kira's love, because he isn't affected. He's doing the art because he wants to do something good. He wants to make a difference as an artist, and he's not a mean guy about it. He's not stubborn and throwing stuff around. I mean, a little bit at the beginning when he's frustrated with his work, but he doesn't even talk back to Simpson, his boss in it, played by James Sloyan, who, by the way, a little bit of a side thing for you, just of interest. He was mostly a soap actor, but you might know him for his two biggest claims to fame. And they're right off his Wikipedia page, because I could have written it because I said, I'm going to say this to Ian. Then I looked at his Wikipedia page. It's like, oh, that's right. He started in a lot of soap operas. And then these two things. One is he was the first mark in the movie The Sting, the guy they take with the money down the trousers. He gets in the cab and says, I just made the easiest 10 grand or whatever. And then, he's screwed up. I kind of let that kind of thing go on happening. I had to send a lesson to them all. As Robert Shaw, the guy was probably swimming somewhere soon. And then the other thing he did is he was the voice of Lexus for 20 plus years and made a king's ransom doing that.
Really?
And never really was on screen that much after that. He did a few things here and there, but he was the voice of Lexus. And he heard that sort of stuff. And you don't get it too much here because he's behind this beard and he's yelling most of the time in this. And that's where I think Sonny really kind of shows his true colors, because he's very sweet about it. He's very like, well, I want to do this and I want this to be nice. And he doesn't match the macho and anger and energy of his sort of stultifying boss. So I love the naivete, the innocence, the charm of it. You may, as I would be willing to say too, some of it has, the smell of cheese to it, but they went there and they kept it up and they didn't leave that. And good for them for at least having that conviction.
Well, I think that's also one of the things I responded to, because it's related directly to Sonny's storyline. That scene in their office where Simpson, the boss, is explaining why Sonny can't just do whatever he wants to do. It's because he's working for a company. It's like,
yes.
If you have people just, it's a funny line because it's kind of like, oh, well, yeah, because you're a jerk. But it's like, people can't just go around doing what they want to do all the time. And it's like, well, why not? We're all human beings, man. But he's talking about in the context of a company, which is true. Like, if you want to go and paint your art and do whatever you want on no timeline, that's great. We just don't have to pay you for it because we're a business and we're one part of a giant chain, right?
Well, it's funny you say that, Ian. And again, I don't want to necessarily take us back to a previous podcast that we did, but
please do.
When we talked about the previous podcast about the art scene in the early 80s, Make Me Famous, that there was a real discussion coming out of the 70s into the 80s about commercial art versus whatever you want to call it, sort of the truer sense of it. And that could be for filmmakers, for music, for illustrators, painters, etc. I remember reading in Time magazine when I was in high school, they had a section on art every week about art. And it's like I discovered Jasper Johns and some of these kinds of really modern artists, and they were fascinating to me, and I liked their art, and I got what they were going for. And this critic reviewed the show or this person's output like it was a movie or a show, and it was fascinating. And yet, when I was in art school, and you were in art school too, there was often discussion about, okay, what are you going to do if you're wanting to paint and you're good at drawing human figures? Do you become a portrait artist and hope that somebody with $20,000, some CEO, will ask you to do his corporate portrait? Or are you going to go in and draw album covers? Are you going to draw for magazines like Playboy or Esquire or whatever there is out there? Because that's where illustration that's where you made money if you were, that kind of craftsman. And the fine artists, they still had to sort of fill a gallery. It's like they still had to answer to somebody like, we need 20 paintings for this show. Oh, well, I've only got 10. Well, you better get going then, Billy. Oh, okay. Oh, shit. That's not my best work, but I got it done in 2 months. Yeah, well, that's your last show too. But all these kind of things were big issues of that time period, and that's what I found kind of interesting about it, because I had those same discussions when I was in art school about what we were going to do, and how much commercial art was good, and was that selling out, or was the best thing to do if you could draw human figures really well, to learn how to tailor that into spread magazine illustrations, because you'd make some more money there, or you could at least work regularly. I'll tell you a quick story too. I think I told you about this, but Robert Risco, who's still one of the great caricaturists, and he does stuff for Vanity Fair, though I think he's sort of semi-retired now. We became friends when I met him at a gallery show, and he told me that there's not that many people who make a career at caricaturing like he did, and Hirschfeld and the guys from Mad Magazine and some of those did. And there's not a lot of people who make art their careers and make a good living at it without doing something supplemental to it, because the demand isn't there for anymore. It's disposable income. It's the rich people who can afford it are mostly in one place, New York. And so it's a tricky world. And I think this movie was kind of onto that already in 1980, just as All That Jazz was a little bit about the same thing. Am I doing a show that's about art, or do I want to put bunks in the seats and make it a big fancy hit? So I admire them for talking about that, because they were definitely discussions that were very much in the vernacular about, is it art? What makes art? How can you be an artist? I mean, I went into advertising because I knew that I could be an artist and do all the things I like, from, using people who act and voiceovers and music, and some ads are cartoons, and some ads are photographs, and some commercials are animated, and others are shot on location, and others in the studio, and all that kind of stuff was art, albeit for commerce. But it was a consistent paycheck, and it gave you healthcare, which was not what some of my friends graduating art school were going to get with their chosen line of work. And they were going to end up being either teachers or waiters, and because they weren't going to make enough being a painter or somebody. I'll do a charcoal sketch of you. Great. How much would you be willing to pay for that? $20? Oh, I was hoping like maybe $2,000. What? No, that doesn't work. That does not compute.
Well, it's the balance, and I think, the more I think about it, I don't know that we need a remake of Xanadu with all the music and everything, but there is something here that I can't let go of. I feel like in the next couple of years, someone should write a story or make a movie about what it means to be an artist in this era.
Yeah.
Because I saw an interview with a guy who's part of a company it's like an AI company that is talking to all the Hollywood studios now. And his big idea is, in 5 years, you can have, I think he used the example of John Wick 5. What if John Wick 5 comes out in theaters, and then day and date, you get the AI package. So you can make your own version of this movie. So there could be a million versions of John Wick running around doing, essentially kind of video gamifying it, write your own stories.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean for the future of art? Does that turn everybody into a quote unquote artist? People who feel like the need to create, does that sap their desire, or is it something innate within you? I could see a movie about someone requiring a muse just to get through this time period, like trying to figure out, is it even worth it trying to do this?
Well, yeah, rather than starting a discotheque, which was, of course, like, a skating discotheque. There were so many of those. That's a show we were going to make $1 million. Let's do a skating discotheque. Wait a minute, we don't have skating rinks already and discotheques, but wait a minute, this is a skating discotheque. What else can we put together? The juxtaposition is magic.
Pizzeria. They'll turn it into Showbiz Pizza.
There you go. That's right. It's half Disney audio animatronics, and bad pizza. But kids will love it. Did I mention we have a ball pit for them too? But to your very point, I mean, again, we've talked many times about AI, and I think it's a good segue here is I think more and more what is bothering me about the discussion of AI is that it's too often about the things that they're doing, which I grant you, maybe are the ones that are getting most of the attention or what companies are using them for. And they're not the best versions of AI. I don't want AI to rewrite somebody's copy or, create a background that doesn't have any thought to it. It's just like, I asked for, give me the Andes with a purple sky and a little bit of like Bob Ross clouds. And that's what they came up with in a minute. Isn't it great? Yeah, but maybe adjust the clouds. They're a little bit all the same size, and they need to be, those kind of things that an artist's mind would know how to edit and do. What I would love is if the AI was used to start off by, I will settle for some good autocorrect on a phone or a laptop. They suck. They've been around for 20 years. I don't write anybody named Ted, but every time I write TE, and I'm going to write 10, it thinks I'm writing Ted. And it's like, I don't have any Ted even on my list. Why is that? What is that in there? And if they know me well enough to know what I'm writing, there's probably 10,000 words I always write, and 10 is one of them. So write that. But they don't know that yet. Some other computer and the AI doesn't get that yet. They don't know how to decipher between phishing and phony stuff and hacky shit and all that. I'm still getting dozens of emails that are telling me they're from PayPal and they're not. And then you send them to the phishing people at PayPal, and they send you back an automated one because they get so many of them. But but what I would love is, and I've said this before to you and shared with you, but on TikTok, there's somebody who's doing these like versions of superhero movies or famous cartoon shows from the 50s and 60s, and then turning them into movies and TV shows done in that period. Like the Jetsons. Meet George Jetson. He's the modern man today of the 21st century. And they've taken all the tropes of the Jetsons cartoon and turned it into a, almost, sort of 60s kind of Italian foreign version of it where everything was a little sweaty looking, everything's a little shiny. And they turned that into like, well, here's our version of the future done through the lens of late 50s, early 60s Italian cinema with, I don't know where they get these actors' pictures from, but they cast them and they have them doing some of the stuff. But it looks like, that's very informed by a 1950s automobile, but it just happens to fly, as opposed to, by the time they did the cartoon version of the Jetsons in the 60s, it tended to look a little bit more modern with the rounded, sculpted sort of a dome and stuff like that. But that would still take creation. You still have to write a clever script. You still have to design that. Somebody has to help the AI design it. Like, okay, that's a great first attempt at Judy, but now let's make her collar just a little bit more workable. Like she could actually move in that collar, because you're just showing her sitting there and that collar out to here isn't going to work. That's where a creative designer needs to come in. I think AI is always an impressionist or a tool. It is not the whole shebang.
But I think the problem is that we're moving, because we had our AI discussion, I think last year when Late Night with the Devil came out, and there's a whole controversy. And I think we were pretty high on the idea of it being used as a tool like we're talking about now. But what's alarming to me is that, of course, because there's no such thing as moderation in modern culture, they're already talking about fast forwarding to like, hey, we can essentially give you, if I understand this idea of an AI package, like here's the John Wick 5 movie, and here's everything you need to like make your own version of it. So there's no, essentially, like immediately opening weekend, there's no such thing as John Wick 5 as envisioned by the people who created it. And eventually get to the point where like, if everyone's got John Wick 5 on their hard drive, then you don't need Hollywood to make parts 6 through 10, which granted, I would be in favor of, but it's kind of like right now it is, and unless they come up with a way to meld it into something that requires human input, it is just scraping everything that's come before it. Eventually it's going to start scraping itself. So the term AI slop is going to become like just not a mocking descriptor, but just a descriptor. That's what kind of worries me. The idea of 10 years ago, if you had the idea of like, wouldn't it be cool to have a retro kind of big screen movie trailer, but do it as the Jetsons? You'd either draw that up as a cartoon, you'd spend a year animating it yourself, or you'd go out and you'd like cast people and like make a little short and make costumes and models and all that stuff. But now it's literally the touch of a button. So in generations that are coming up now, we talk about this in terms of movies, like these prequel series that are just ruining the legacy of these franchises. The coming generations are not going to know any better, and they're not going to know how or why would I ever go outside, try and recruit people to help me with my vision when I can literally ask for a prompt. And if it doesn't come out the right way, I spend maybe 20 minutes perfecting the prompt. I release it on the internet and I'm already famous.
Well, and to your very point, Ian, you've said this many times on your show, and you're a great, smart and worthy stickler of this kind of stuff, is they're already AIing a lot of these better properties by ripping them off and imitating them and taking the best bits of them and recreating them. And I think that's what a lot of AI does is, if you say to AI, write this like these 10 ads that have been done before, except make this the product, they can probably do it. It's 3 sentences. Now, I think you're still going to want somebody who has got a better eye to say, let's give a little more charm to this. This seems a little flat and maybe too measured. We'll tweak it a little bit. So I think there's always going to be the need, hopefully, for somebody who has that supervisory capacity and that direction sort of capability. But I think more and more you see products coming out of Hollywood that feel almost like they were already put through the AI machine, because it's like, well, that would be something they create, but no creative director has really stepped in here to create something different or say, no, that isn't right. That isn't logical. That doesn't make sense. We shouldn't be saying that. That's the wrong thing. Just like 6 fingers on a hand is oftentimes the wrong thing that AI does when they interpret you and try to turn you into a cartoon character or something. And not The Simpsons with only 3 fingers. But this is the issue, I think, that too many people now are getting used to sort of this, oh, I like that because that reminds me of that. Yeah, but I think it has to be less of reminding you of it, more like, oh, that's an interesting idea, and you've taken it here. I think creativity is always better when we further something along. Sure, we all learn from the best, and some people will say, if you're going to steal from the best, but don't steal hook, line, and sinker out the window. You can be inspired by them. Every artist you can name under the sun was inspired by somebody else. There's very few people who are totally original. They've all been inspired by, heck, writers, musicians, parents, friends, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we have to get more into shows like Alien Earth that advance the alien story, not just sort of recreate some of its greatest hits with maybe a little bit of AI and modern blending of people taken from Ex Machina or The Terminator. I mean, I just think that those aren't really creative souls, and the creative soul sort of looking at the way, you've got the character here of Sonny trying to be this purist in his way. I think those kind of things reflect more often than not people who know how to sort of mix and match really well. And there's a charm to that. And there's certainly a part of that works very well as well. But it's not enough to make it wholly convincing. And I think that's where, dare I say, your and my our eyes as fans as well as critics is objecting to a lot of what we're seeing in something like Alien Earth, where Noah Hawley's a better creator than that, or he should be. And he did better things with some of the other things he's done before, particularly in Fargo. But too much of Alien Earth feels very, very familiar. Like it's almost, now that's what I call Alien. Like the 25 greatest hits, and it comes out every 6 months.
Well, I want to kind of wrap up on this, and folks, because this episode will be going out on, I think, Friday the 12th, if I have that right.
That's correct.
So you'll be able to go back and watch Jeff and I's conversation about the latest episode of Alien Earth, the continued autopsy. Sorry, but I want to ask you a question. Maybe this is too big to throw out there, at least food for thought. But I think about the artist Chuck Close, who's one of my favorite artists. Mm-hmm. And he was, I don't even know if he's still alive or if he passed away. I should know this. But he was in a car accident and he was paralyzed. And so he went from being able to do these like amazing kind of like regular portraits to having to do portraits in tiles, like micro canvases almost, that would be put together almost like if you would look at a single panel, it's just a bunch of colors and swirls. It doesn't make any sense. But when you put it up against like a 100-foot wall with the other 100 or 99 tiles or whatever, it makes a completely photorealistic portrait of someone. And folks, if you don't believe me, go and just Google Chuck Close right now and go out and buy his books, because they're phenomenal. But I wonder, like, how much of our appreciation of art is the fact that it was created and it was toiled over, versus I just took a photograph of Chuck Close. Like, one of the first things that turned me on to him was, in 7th grade, seeing a picture in a magazine. They were doing an article on him, and it was a portrait of him. Probably his most famous, like the glasses and the cigarette hanging down. It's black and white. He's kind of looking down at you. I'm like, it's a photograph of some slob. And then you realize that, oh no, this is actually a gigantic painting. And you're like, this looks, I mean, forget about Alex Ross. This looks like something, it looks like a
photorealism, I think, was what you would argue that almost fell into that category, did it not, in a way?
It did, but especially what he did later in his career, when he was able to do photorealism by not painting photorealistically, by almost doing impressionistic assemblages that came out photorealistic. So my question is, like, is someone a generation from now going to look at someone like Chuck Close, or someone who is trying to model their career after Chuck Close, and say, I'm going to spend 6 months working on a wall-sized canvas portrait of someone, and other people are going to look at it like, why? I can make that in 10 seconds, and I can have it printed out and put up in a gallery next to yours. They're going to look identical. Is it the toil? Is it the vision? What is it that makes it art?
It's funny, and you asked a broad question, and I think it's arguably up to the viewer in some way to determine. I mean, one of the great lines of all time is, but is it art? I think my answer to all of that is yes, yes, and yes. And that is, I think art is like beauty in the eye of the beholder, but I think there are many ways of doing art. I mean, there are people who used to think that photography wasn't art. I mean, there are people who, would hang Jeff Lichtenstein in the Museum of Modern Art, but they wouldn't hang Walter Kelly, who did Pogo and the original Al Cap and the Charles Schultz, of the people who did the comic strips that originally did that, or those artists who did Mary Worth and those things that Lichtenstein was doing parodies of. I think there's room for both. I think there's room for the guy who's making a comment on it about American society through this kind of cheeky version of it, which everybody recognizes, but he's kind of having fun with to make for these bigger, more melodramatic moments, because he's blowing up these images into such huge proportions, just like Close does. As well as there's, the variations of theme. I think a cartoon or a caricature is as viable a portrait of somebody as a, sculpture or a sort of oil and brush canvas painting by some of the great artists who know how to get a likeness without having to use tracing and all those kind of things that people used to use they called it the Lucy back in the 80s, where you put a picture in, it would project this thing and you would draw around it, and then you didn't have to worry about getting the structure so right, because then you could just apply your technique to it and get more done. But I think there's room for all of it. But I think what there isn't room for is stuff that is bad, that is done with not the finesse it needs. Like, I think sometimes work needs time. I think sometimes work needs a little more thought. Alien Earth is perfectly fine as straightforward entertainment for somebody who hasn't seen Alien or any of the movies and shows and books and comic books in the franchise before. And on many levels, it's watchable, decent fare, even from yours and my eyes. Well, maybe not yours, but certainly from some of my aesthetics. And yet it isn't enough. I think there has to be at some point where you feel somebody pushing it to be better, pushing it to be a little bit more than just that's good enough. People always say the enemy of great is good. I think the enemy of good today is more like good enough, because good enough suggests to me that you may not know what good enough is or what good is. That's, hey, it met the timetable, it filled the slot that I needed to for whatever, and that's good enough, and we live to fight another day, and tomorrow we'll do a better thing. I mean, I think we talked about this, but that's what comic strip artists would say. I talked to one in college, and he said, you try to be funny twice a week. And if you have 5 that are just amusing or kind of cute, that's fine. But he said, I couldn't hold myself like Gary Larson, who could be funny every damn day and inspired. But I think that isn't good enough. I think you have, if that's your profession, whether it's comic strips, painting, or whatever, try to do better. If you're going to do another movie or a show based on previous material that's been done before, what can you do with it that's truly fresh and interesting, and dare I say, evolves it? Going back, and like you said, I think you had a great idea. Rather than remaking Xanadu with, they're opening a discotheque, and isn't it cheeky and corny today by today's standard? In fact, we'll do it in the 80s because that's going to make it even funnier. We'll be laughing at it. No, do it today with a modern artist, and what is that art that he needs a muse for, and how does that muse deal with AI or whatever he's challenged with today? That's evolving the idea. That's what I like about your thinking, Ian, and that's, I think, the way all artists should think is, I can stand on the shoulders of those who went before me, but how can I advance what they've done?
Well, I think I take what you're saying about, the different kinds of art being valuable, and I consider photography to be art too. I mean, but I guess what I'm struggling with is there a future in which, and I might just be, the doomsayer, the crazy Ralph of this conversation. I have no idea where this is all going, but could there be a future where younger people come up and they don't see a point in learning how to make art?
Yes.
Because they can just essentially wish into their computer or their iPad or whatever they're going to have 20 years from now and come up with something that's whatever they can imagine. It can be 3D printed on demand. It can be blown up into a wall mural. So why bother learn how to paint? Who does that anymore? It's like you don't need buggy whip manufacturers now because you've got Porsches. It's a different kind of thing because this deals inherently with creativity and not modes of transportation where you need to scale it. But in terms of like, are we going to have sculptors? Are we going to have painters? Are we going to have authors? That kind of thing.
I mean,
and not necessarily people.
Hopefully so.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, I hope we will still have people who strive for better aesthetics. I think there has to be a qualifier of what is worthy or not, because soon, if you just have bad design, then you're going to have bad design that falls apart or is an eyesore people don't want to come to because they're not attracted to it. And if you can test it, you can find out that maybe the more attractive colors or shapes or designs that are pleasing the eye will be better for commerce as well too. Again, I think to your point, Ian, will we have enough of those people left around to know that that's important and to do it? I think if it leads to bad sales, then they will be in demand as much as the people that just create it. But that is a good question, because I think we're losing a certain amount of aesthetics today where, like I said, when they started asking for content and not creative, like they used to say, I need creative work here. And now it's often become content, whether it's to fill a network schedule or fill out 100 pages in a magazine, or even check the boxes on emails that are sent from one client to an interested buyer. Content isn't creative necessarily. It can be, but it can't just be an editor saying, I want 100 pages. I got to get 100 pages in this magazine this month. It's got to be, no, I've got to get 100 pages that are worth reading in the magazine this month. And that's the difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, we're going to continue this conversation outside the context of Xanadu. I know we went really far afield here, everyone, but I feel like Xanadu is one of those strange movies that you can be easily written off or forgotten. But if you're open to watching it and wading through a bit of roller skating and a lot of disco, there are some themes and ideas here that could even be seen as relevant today. I think we've touched on some of those. So Jeff York of The Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists, I want to thank you again for going on this journey with me. It's always a pleasure, and we always end up talking about things that are way bigger than quote unquote just the movies. So I appreciate it, my friend.
You bet. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right. Well, and folks out there, again, Xanadu is on 4K via Kino Lorber. So if this is all your jam, they've got your jelly or peanut butter or whatever. And if you like this show, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications, all that business. Be sure and check out Jeff's stuff via the links down below. Yeah, until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much and take care. Hey everyone, Ian here. I know, long time no see. But if you like the video you just watched, feel free to subscribe to Kicking the Seat right here, and also check out the playlist and recommended video right here. Thanks for watching.